Alyssa Milano calls on all abortion-supporting women to go on a sex strike, thereby reducing the number of women who will get abortions in order to own the pro-lifers or something like that. Seems pretty good. Meanwhile, pro-lifers hold a powerful 1,000-person rally in Philly. I went to it as child-stalking Pennsylvania State Rep Brian Sims hides in his apartment because for the right, life is a precious gift, whereas for the left, life is a fatal, sexually transmitted disease from which no one has ever recovered. We will talk about sex, baby. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. We're 3 days into the sex strike now. All conservative men seem to be doing pretty great, smiles on their faces. All of the whiny, liberal, feminist men who are dating feminist women who are going on a sex strike seem just as miserable as they always have. So I guess nothing really has changed. We will talk about sex strikes through the ages, from Aristophanes to Alyssa Milano, and why they don't work. But first, it is time to move on to one of our favorite success stories, Movement watches. Founded on the belief that style shouldn't break the bank, they've sold almost 2 million watches worldwide by bringing quality designs at fair prices. I got to tell you something. I was on a plane the other day. I'm sitting next to a guy wearing a, I won't say the brand, very, very, very expensive watch. The guy looks over at my watch. I'm wearing my Movement Revolver Atlas. He asks me where I got my watch from. I said, oh, well, I can save you 15% right now, actually, if you listen to my show. Movement watches are all about looking good while keeping it simple. They don't tell you how many steps you've taken, or they don't blow up your wrist with stupid text messages. They're not intrusive. They don't give you like beeps and boops and all that kind of stuff. They tell the time like a classic timepiece should do, and they look really good while they're doing it. Movement watches start at just $95. If you were to try to get this watch in a department store, you'd be paying $400 or $500 for the same quality from a traditional brand. This watch, clean design, very minimal. It's got this retro vibe to it. It reminds me a lot of watches from the 50s and 60s, but it's updated. It's not just a total throwback. It's updated for the modern era with this clean design and high quality. It's why Movement has sold almost 2 million watches in 160 countries. Get 15% off today with free shipping and free returns by going to mvmt.com/Knowles, Knowles. That is Movement launching new styles on their site all the time. Check it out at mvmt.com/Knowles, Knowles. Join the movement and get this one, the Revolver Atlas. That's my favorite one. So Alyssa Milano is going on a sex strike. Why is she going on a sex strike? Because of anti-abortion laws, specifically the one passed in Georgia, which says that if a baby has a beating heart, you're not allowed to kill it. The left, being led by Hollywood, Alyssa Milano, political activists, are so upset that now in Georgia, you're not allowed to kill babies with beating hearts that they want to go on a sex strike. However, like most things that Hollywood celebrities and leftist activists say, they didn't think this one through. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Alyssa Milano wrote, quote, "Our reproductive rights are being erased. Until women have legal control over our own bodies, we just cannot risk pregnancy. Join me by not having sex until we get bodily autonomy back. I'm calling for a sex strike. Pass it on." There are no original ideas on earth. This is not original at all. This is the premise of an ancient Greek play called Lysistrata by Aristophanes. So now some people who are reading about the Alyssa Milano thing are calling it Alyssistrata. So the premise of that play is that all the men were fighting in ancient Greece and the women wanted them to stop going to war, so they all cut them off from sex until the men would stop going to war. This is a very ancient idea. This is actually a very conservative idea, that the way that women can affect change in the world is by withholding sex from men. Alyssa Milano cited how this has been used in throughout the ages, either apocryphally, either just as a matter of telling stories or in actual history. She said that the Iroquois women refused to have sex in the 17th century as a way to stop unregulated warfare, so just the same as the ancient Greek version. And she said very recently, Liberian women used a sex strike in 2003 to demand an end to a long-running civil war. I'm not sure. I was not in Liberia in 2003, so I cannot verify that. However, I now may have to have surgery to remove my mind's eye because Bette Midler is joining in on the sex strike. So now that image is in my head, and I'm very sorry, that image is in your head as well. She tweeted out and said, I hope the women of Georgia stop having sex with men until these indignities are overturned. So if you were hoping to sleep with Bette Midler, you're out of luck, pal. Sorry to tell you that. So the thing I would like to point out about this sex strike, there's so many jokes to be made about it. The thing I would like to point out is that it doesn't make any sense. And it's not just that it doesn't make any sense in one way or in two ways. There are actually, as far as I can tell, 7 ways in which the sex strike from Alyssa Milano does not make any sense. The first one is, abortion-supporting women are now practicing chastity, thereby reducing the number of overall abortions in order to stick it to the pro-lifers. Hold on a second there. So the social conservatives, who have been saying for years that women should be chaste and not be sleeping around with every guy they see, now the pro-abortion women are practicing chastity. They're not going to have sex, and therefore they're not going to have unwanted pregnancies, and therefore they're going to end abortion. Cool. All right. That's fine. If we knew we could do it that easily, we would have not been campaigning in Georgia and around the country. We would have just called up Alyssa Milano and tricked her into doing this sex strike. The second way in which it doesn't make any sense is, even let's say that these pro-abortion women were going to have sex and then get pregnant and then not have abortions, even if they don't have the abortion. Now, the women who support abortion are going to stop having sex and therefore stop having children that they can teach to support abortion. A lot of people inherit their political views from their parents. We like to think that we're all totally free thinkers. We all completely come to our own political ideas on our own. In some cases, that's certainly true. But for some people, they just kind of go along with the political biases of their parents. In this case, the women are not going to, they're not going to have sex. They're not going to have children. They're not going to teach them to support abortion. So over time, abortion activism will die out. Okay, that works for me. Again, if we don't need the Georgia law. If we can end abortion another way, happy to do it. The next way in which this doesn't make any sense, and this is my favorite way, is just ask yourself, if you're Alyssa Milano or somebody else, who does this hurt? Not to tell any tales out of school, I don't want to be, giving away rumors from the old purple mattress. This does not hurt me. This does not hurt conservative men who ostensibly are married to or dating or engaged or whatever to women who are not crazy followers of Alyssa Milano. So the conservative men still get to have all the sex they want. The men who are supporting this bill in Georgia and other heartbeat bills throughout the country, they're still having all the sex that they want. In this case, it's just leftist women depriving their leftist boyfriends of sex in order to stick it to the conservatives. Great, man. I often point out that feminist men are the creepiest people that have ever walked the face of the earth. They're all just walking Beto O'Rourke's, and you would never let your daughter go near a feminist man. Feminist men are the kind of guys who, when you go out of town, they're there to comfort your girlfriend, that's kind of feminist men. So these guys they've basically made a deal with the devil. They've said, we're going to surrender our manliness, we're going to surrender our masculinity, we're going to not be toxic, we're going to be totally feminist men in order to ingratiate themselves to women. They're going to be like really sensitive, and like, So those guys have made that deal because they think it's going to help them sleep with a lot more women. And now those are the only guys who are not having sex because of this stupid ban. Okay, works for me. Another way in which this doesn't make sense, number 4, women. So the idea is the only way that women can change this abortion law in Georgia, the only way they can affect political change is by not having sex with men and therefore compelling men to change the law because only men can change the law. Except that women make up the majority of the country. And women have a major voting advantage over men. Women vote over men with a 15-point margin. So not only the majority of the country, the majority of the electorate. If women want to affect political change, they can. Now, the premise here, of course, is ridiculous. Alyssa Milano's premise is that all women want to have abortion on demand all the time. That isn't true. Half of women support pro-life. Half of women oppose abortion. But if women did all support abortion, you could change any abortion law in the country. It's so ridiculous to say that women are totally subservient in our body politic. Women have the vote. Women have had the vote for 100 years. They don't need to rely on men. They don't need to compel men. They don't need to trick men into giving them what they want to have. Now, the fifth way in which this doesn't make any sense is, in order to stop men from controlling women's bodies, Alyssa Milano is going to control women's bodies. So the whole premise here is that women don't have any autonomy over their bodies. Therefore, you can't have sex women. And this leads to my favorite irony of the whole thing, which is that sexually liberated women are now admitting that men like sex more than women. The Alyssa Milanos of the world, the people who support the sexual revolution, abortion, all those sorts of things, they are now admitting that really men prefer sex. And women, maybe they like sex, but they don't like it as much as men. Sex, they say, is primarily about men's pleasure. That's the thesis of the sexual revolution types. They wouldn't admit that in those words, because traditionally sex is primarily about making babies. I mean, a euphemism for sex is, hey, you two going to go over there and make some babies? That's traditionally. But now what the abortion activists are saying is, no, sex is not primarily about making babies. We can totally stop making babies, and if you accidentally do make a baby, we'll kill the baby. But if it's not primarily about making babies, then what is it? Is it primarily about women's pleasure? No. If sex were primarily about women's pleasure, then Alyssa Milano wouldn't propose a sex strike to compel men to change the law. The only reason the sex strike should work is because men really, really like sex and women don't like sex that much. So now you've got the left, the sexual revolution types, admitting that sex is primarily about men's pleasure. Which, by the way, in this day and age is obviously the case. And if you talk to any guy after he's had a couple drinks, no matter if he's a liberal guy, a so-called feminist guy, or a regular normal guy, they will all point this out. This is the greatest trick that feminism has ever played on women, is convincing women to give men limitless sexual gratification with absolutely no accountability, no responsibility whatsoever, and then convincing themselves that they're the ones benefiting. So women they'll say, okay, I've actually heard this before. Say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick up a guy tonight and we're just going to have casual sex and it's not going to mean anything. You see every guy in the country just, oh my gosh, no, am I dreaming? Wake up, I'm pinching myself, I can't. But the women have convinced themselves of this because feminists want to convince women that women react to sex in exactly the same way men do. And I think a lot of the reason why some left-wing women are upset with Alyssa Milano right now is she's giving away the game. She's admitting, no, men want sex more than women do. Men like sex physically more than women do. That's why this idea of a sex strike has existed since the earliest days of our history. It's why the classic example of this is a play from ancient Greece, and it has persisted over time. Now, what we're seeing on the left is a neo-Puritanism. It's just a bunch of rules. It's like a new Victorian era. The left told us that we had to get rid of all our old rules concerning sex. Right? They said, no, you can have sex before you're married. You can have sex outside of marriage. You can have sex with men, women, animals. I don't know what they're saying now. You can have threesomes and foursomes and polyamory and gender non-binary and 56 genders and no rules concerning sex. That was the pitch in the 1960s and 70s. That was the pitch until very recently. But now, once they've ripped out all the old rules, they're the ones making up a bunch of new rules. They're the ones who on college campuses around the country are talking about a sexual assault epidemic. Title IX on campus, they're calling for consent forms to have sex, consent apps to have sex, redefining the term sexual assault, redefining all these various forms of sexual assault, saying you can only do this and this, and you can only do this at this time, and now Alyssa Milano saying women shouldn't have sex at all until a certain law is repealed. How did this happen? How did it go from the conservatives making all the rules about sex and enforcing them to the left enforcing all the rules about sex? It's because nature abhors a vacuum. So I guess the idea for the 1960s radicals was when you get rid of traditional sexual mores, then that's it, you'll be fine. You just get rid of them, and then we're going to have an age of Aquarius, and we're all going to have a bunch of hippy-dippy sex, and it's going to be a lot of fun, right? That was the idea of 1968 and 1969. But inevitably, after that sunny, sexy time in the 1960s, you get the 1970s. You get the consequences of that. You get the decay and the degradation, and you go from the high of the drugs in the 60s to the hangover and the addiction of the 1970s. When you get rid of traditional sexual mores, inevitably you have to invent new ones. Why? Why do we need the rules? Because the traditional rules arose for a reason. Did you just think, I guess the left thought this, did you think that for thousands of years of human history, we've had fairly similar rules governing sex? Some changes over time. We've always had a lot of rules concerning sex. Did you think that we had all of those rules just by accident? Because a bunch of old people weren't as enlightened as you, and now you're so enlightened so you realize we don't need any rules about sex? It was just an accident, thousands of years of human history? No. The rules arose because you need rules about sex, because sex poses serious questions, and sex poses serious problems that you have to seriously confront. So fine, in the 1960s, you want to get rid of all the old rules concerning sex, sex before marriage, prophylactics, condoms, the pill, things like that. Abortion, you have the major abortion debates in the 60s, ultimately leading to Roe v. Wade in the 70s. You totally change the rules, even down to that essential rule that you shouldn't kill a baby. Abortion was such a shame, such a disgrace, as late as the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Now all of a sudden you have shout your abortion. You have people proud of their abortions. They're not really proud, but they're pretending to be proud of their abortions. You totally change the rules. Okay, there's no more rules, no bars. Everything's okay, nothing is wrong. If it feels good, do it. And then what happens if someone gets sexually assaulted? Oh, hey, we're just having fun. There's no more rules. If there's no rules, can you force someone to have sex against her will? No, obviously. Okay, so you need a rule there. Well, how do you know that she's consenting? What if she's had a few drinks? You're the one encouraging everyone to go out and get blackout drunk and go to bars and parties all the time. So what if she does that? What if she's not blackout drunk, but she just has casual sex and she regrets it the next day because the guy just walks out and leaves her? There's no rules, there's no accountability, there's no traditional sexual mores. Is that okay? No, that's kind of wrong too, isn't it? What if now you go out, you have sex, you produce a baby, and the baby's growing, and you want to kill it? Are you allowed to kill that baby? That seems a bridge too far. What is that? That is what we're litigating right now. The rules will reinstate themselves. Nature abhors a vacuum. The big difference here is the worldview. For the left, life is a sexually transmitted disease. It is fatal, and no one has ever survived it. This is why they call abortion reproductive health. They use this euphemism, reproductive health, and it's ironic because abortion is not about reproduction. It's about the opposite of reproduction. It's about stopping reproduction. But they call it reproductive health because for the left, to ban abortion is the same thing as banning a treatment for chlamydia. To ban abortion is the same thing as banning a treatment for gonorrhea or herpes. It's a sexually transmitted disease. It's a bad consequence of sex, is pregnancy, according to the left. It's an STD to treat rather than how the right views it, which is that it's a sexually generated gift. And what this argument comes down to is, what is life? Not this stupid argument that some people have in abortion debates where they say, well, when does life begin? How can you prove that life begins at conception? The word conception, that's how I can prove it. Life begins at conception by definition. In conception, you have a sperm cell, has 23 chromosomes. It's a sperm cell. It'll just, if you leave it be, it'll just be a sperm cell and eventually it'll die. Then you have an egg, also has 23 chromosomes. And if you leave it be, it'll just be an egg and then it'll die. And then when you combine them, when the sperm fertilizes the egg at the moment of conception, it becomes a human being with 46 chromosomes, usually. Sometimes the little differences, but 46 chromosomes, a new individual human being with individual human DNA that is developing in a perfectly continuous path into a little tiny baby, and then a bigger baby, and then a toddler, and then a child, and then a preteen, and then a teenager, then an adult, then a senior citizen, and then they die. It's the spoiler of that story. But that is a total path of life, undisturbed, continuous from the very beginning. We're not asking the question, when does life begin? That's obvious. At the moment of conception, you've got something that is living. It meets all of the scientific characteristics of life. Scientists have described the characteristics of life over the years. The unborn baby meets all of those. It's obviously human. It's not a giraffe. It's not a zebra. It's not a little dog. It's a human being. It's genetically human. It is human. It is essentially human. It's independent. It's not part of the mother. It is distinct from the mother. We're not arguing about when that life begins. We're arguing about what life is, how life should be treated. Is life a burden? Is life awful? Is life terrible? Sometimes today you hear environmentalists say, we can't bring more children into the world. It's bad for the earth. If you bring in more children, it will increase the effects of global warming. Sometimes you hear people make the same argument for the opposite reason. They say, we can't bring more children into the world because the world is so bad and it's too bad for children. So, well, hold on, I thought the children were too bad for the world. No, the world is too bad for children, according to some people. There's so much crime. There's so much suffering. Life essentially is evil, according to these people. Life is a bad thing, and it's got to be cured. And the cure that they've come up with on the pro-abortion left, the Alyssa Milano left, the Democratic Party left, is to kill it in the womb. Very different from what we saw in Philadelphia. I was in Philly last Friday over with my pal Matt Walsh because Matt decided to throw a pro-life demonstration outside of that Planned Parenthood where Brian Sims, that state representative, was bullying elderly women, bullying underage girls, trying to dox them. Matt said on a Tuesday, said, we should have a rally here. Then Lila Rose, Live Action, came out. They said, we're going to get a permit. We're going to do the rally. 3 days later, there's a major rally in Philly, over 1,000 people, according to CBS News. That's according to a left-wing news source. They're saying it was over 1,000 people. I couldn't tell how many people there were because there were just so many as far as the eye could see. We got some video. We talked to some people on the street. There were a handful of pro-abortion demonstrators. We talked to them. We talked to a lot of the pro-life people. We will discuss this major difference in worldview. And then we'll talk about AOC, because AOC just admitted that one of her major arguments for the Green New Deal is a total joke. Then, if we have time, we'll talk about our latest presidential candidate nickname, Alfred E. Newman, for Mr. Pete Buttigieg. What, Pete Worry? All of that and more. But first, you got to go to dailywire.com. $10 a month, $100 for an annual membership. You get me. You get the Andrew Klavan Show. You get the Ben Shapiro Show. You get the Matt Walsh Show. You get to ask questions in the mailbag coming up on Thursday. You get to ask questions backstage also coming up. You get Another Kingdom, and you get this, the Leftist Tears Tumbler. Ooh, this is a special concoction. This is that sweet Georgia brew. Some of that sweet tea leftist tears. Tastes really good. Tastes like you can't kill babies after 6 weeks. Go get yours. We got more of these bills coming across the nation. Go to dailywire.com. We'll be right back.